I just got back from a speaking trip in the Livingston, Tennessee area. Now, Livingston is near Allen's, Tennessee. It's just down the road from Salina. And I've had some really, really neat experiences in that part of the country. On this particular trip, I got to stay at a house called Synthedox 1. Everybody else just calls it the Waterfall House. The reason it's called Synthedox 1 is there's actually a Synthedox 2, and there's an eccentric gentleman who's no longer with us who built these two houses, and they were built kind of Frank Lloyd Wright style over waterfalls. And I got to stay in one of those. And although it's one of the coolest places I've ever experienced, it may not be the coolest thing that's ever happened to me in Livingston, Tennessee. I've been up there lots of times. This is the area of the country where the old gentleman who used to make the white oak baskets, about 95 years old, he was still making handmade baskets. And when I gave him one of the 550 guys, he called it the Woven Man. Uh, we shook hands, and I could tell he worked with his hands because of his grip. And he looked at me and said, "You've done a little weaving yourself, haven't you?" After shaking my hand. This is the area of the country where I got to stay in the little cabin right below the Kentucky border, where I had to cross the Cumberland River Ferry to get back to the house. This is the area of the country where I got to go and shoot at a long distance park, and for the first time in my life, shoot at targets at 1,000 yards. I've stayed in a couple of cabins that were 150 years old. Neither one of those cabins is an Airbnb. They're not open to the public. The private owners just let me stay there. I've got to climb at B Rock. We went out one time on a climbing adventure, and this old gentleman named Mr. Oglesby, I believe, said he had a place we could rappel. And as we were walking out across this flat pasture, I thought, well, there's nothing to rappel here. If I find a rock to rappel, I'll eat the tires off my car. Well, it ended up he owned a sinkhole that was about 150 foot straight down and had an exposed rock wall inside it. I've also got some artwork memories from that part of the country. I've got a picture where I'm walking, and trailing behind me is Joshua Corder, Jordan Corder, and my own daughter, Lonnie Elizabeth Jones. And I'm pointing at something, and somebody took a picture of us. I guess Jackie took that picture. I turned it into an ink wash and drew an outline sketch with a felt tip marker, and then hit it with water so that the edges would run and it would create some natural shading. And then I turned it into a negative so that the white areas were black and the black areas were white. And I used it as the cover of my youth ministry book called Pedagogue. And there's one more piece of artwork from that part of the country. I was going through some stuff. Jackie wants to find some of my original sketches and put them in our house as part of our remodel. And I came upon this pen and ink drawing of a roadrunner wearing sunglasses. Now, it's not a cartoon roadrunner. It's an actual what a roadrunner looks like. But he's just wearing these wraparound sunglasses, and it says, "On the Road, Roadrunners Club, Livingston, Tennessee." And it's a logo I did for a T-shirt for a guy named Lynn Burnett. Uh, Lynn Burnett and the Livingston Roadrunners Club. It made me smile. And I thought about running with Lynn Burnett. Based on the date of the sketch, there's at the bottom of the little Roadrunner's foot is Lonzo 98. And I probably drew it in 98, which means this adventure would have been 98 or 97. And if it's 97, I'd been training with the SWAT team for about 5 years, but I was still early in my running journey. I was just running occasionally and really couldn't keep up with the guys yet. And I would not have considered myself a runner, but I was speaking in the area around Livingston, Tennessee, the Standing Stone State Park area, and around Allen's, Tennessee. And in one of the lessons, I'd made mention of something using jogging as an illustration in one of the sermons. And after the lesson, one of the church members there, Lynn Burnett, invited me to go for a run with him. He said, so, one night after services, bring your stuff and we'll just go for a little run. Well, I was an early runner and trying to run every chance I got, especially when I'm out of town. If you go out of town and speak, then your workout schedule just goes, it just bottoms out. That's why I do body weight workouts. And that's why I tried to run, because no matter where you're at, you can do push-ups. No matter where you're at, you can run. And so Lynn invited me to go with him, and I accepted the invitation. And so one night after church, I changed clothes and met him, and we were going to go down and run one of his loops around the town of Livingston. Lots of things memorable of that particular event. The first thing that I remember every time I think about the event is how badly prepared I was for running with this man. At the time of this podcast, modern time, not talking about 97, 98, but at the time of this podcast, Lynn has run 54 marathons and has run 18 consecutive Boston marathons. I had no business trying to run with this guy. I had no business trying to keep up with this guy. What I would have considered my normal workout, a 3.5 mile run, he would have probably had considered his warm up. But he met me and he took me running. And then, assuming this is 97 or 98, based on the signature of the Roadrunner sketch, I would have been 34, 35 years old. And Lynn would have been much younger as well. And not only would he have been younger, but he would have been faster and stronger at the time. In the 27 years that I've known him, in the 27 years since that trip where we ran together, if he remembers that he outran me, if he remembers that he had to slow up for me, if he remembers he didn't running with me because I was in such bad shape, if he remembers any of that, he's never, ever mentioned it. Even so, every time we get together, if I see him at CYC, if I run into him at another event, or if I go back to the Livingston area and visit with him, every time we get together, we reminisce about the one time we ran together. It was after dark, and it was summertime. As he glided along effortlessly and I plodded along the Salina Highway or either Bradford Hicks Drive, we began to be heckled by the locals. There were loud cars. There were a few shouts. There might have been a few obscenities. I was breathing so hard I couldn't really hear. But the most memorable thing about that was the beer bottle that came sailing past us. And yes, it was close enough that you could tell it was a beer bottle. I'm not sure if it was aimed at us or if the thrower threw it being unaware of our presence on the shoulder of the road. But nonetheless, the beer bottle came whizzing past our heads. And in all my running, in all his running, neither of us had ever had a beer bottle thrown at us. My understanding of the physics of this is that if the car, which the beer bottle was launched from, was doing 40 miles an hour, then the bottle itself was doing 40 miles an hour as it hurled past us. A glass projectile doing 40 miles an hour will, to quote a famous bad guy I saw one time, will, quote, ruin your weekend. To quote another, studies have shown that empty beer bottles, when thrown, have enough impact energy to potentially fracture the human skull, according to Science Direct Study. My question is, who studies this? How does this actual study play itself out? Flyers go up around campus. Seeking subjects for research study. Must have good dental insurance. Please apply at the physical science lab. Our control group will stand and no bottle will be thrown, while our test group will play dodge bottle and then visit the x-ray room. In simple terms, simple math terms, the velocity of the object in meters per second squared multiplied by half the mass in kilograms will yield the kinetic energy in joules. An empty beer bottle has a mass of 0.45 kilograms and moving at 40 miles per hour or 17.88 meters per second equals 71.73 joules. And assuming it only traveled 1 meter to impact, then the 71.73 newtons of force, or like being hit with about 16 pounds. If the distance was shorter, the impact force would actually be significantly higher. Hey, Jules, want to ruin your day with a beer bottle? I mean, unbelievable. Well, the beer bottle traveling at the speed of the car and with the potential impact of 71.73 newtons of force did not hit us. But the potential for damage was the same regardless of the intent or the impact or lack thereof. The fact that it was aimed or not aimed is inconsequential. The fact that it missed made all the difference in the world. One of us would have been hurt. and hurt badly. And neither of us were hurt. It sort of hurt my feelings. It actually made me quite mad. But it did not stop our run. In fact, when talking about this, Lynn said he always thinks of our running together and dodging beer bottles. And he says, I always come up with the idea that no matter what Satan throws at you, you still need to finish your race. I think by extension, he would say you can still finish your race and you should finish your race. And the only reason you don't finish your race is if you use what they throw at you as a reason to quit. When I think about this incident, when I think about it, I think of the one element that allowed me to finish. You see, I think about this as I was a struggling runner, trying to keep up with, if not an elite runner, at least an experienced runner. And in the midst of my struggle, my being woefully unprepared to run with this guy, I had added adversity. But the guy I was running with acted like it was no big deal. He acted like the run was no big deal. He acted like my lack of conditioning was no big deal. And he really acted like the beer bottle was no big deal. The projectile didn't even seem to bother him. The only thing he focused on was getting us to finish. And maybe he felt responsible for me because he'd invited me. Or maybe it's just the way you behave when you're a runner. Maybe he was worried about me because I was in an inferior condition, or maybe that's just the way you behave when you're in a partnership. We had never run together before, and in the last 27 years, we have not run together since. But for that run, on that night, we were partners. He didn't compare us as runners, or if he did, he never did it out loud. My only understanding of his evaluation of me or the situation is that we were partners. We were running together. We started together. We stayed together. And we would finish together. And that was in spite of my shortcomings, my short strides, my being short of breath, or my just being short. We stayed the course in spite of our differences and in spite of the added external circumstances. It would have been very easy to quit. It would have been very easy to focus on what was thrown at us and use it as an excuse to stop. You blame it on fear, danger, adversity, hostility, lack of hospitality, or the ignorance of the guy who threw the bottle, even if he didn't know we were there. No matter how we explain the situation, the result would have been the same. We would have stopped running because something out of our control affected our plans. I'm not saying that stopping for any reason would have been bad. Had one of us been hit, it might have stopped the one that it had hit, and then we both would have had to stop because someone would have had to render aid. But we weren't hit. Looking back and knowing Lynn, I think anything short of knocking one of us out or one of us having a concussion, anything short of that, regardless of what had happened, we would have finished anyway. I don't know why he didn't stop, but that's the reason I didn't stop. It wasn't the heat, it wasn't the dark, it wasn't my lack of conditioning, it wasn't the drunk or the bottle that determined the outcome of my run that night. It was not the circumstances, but it was the companionship. It was not where I was running, it's not when I was running, it's not how I was running or what was happening to me as I was running. The deciding factor, the difference in quitting or finishing came down to one thing, and that was who was running beside me. Be careful what you run towards. Be careful what you run from. But more importantly, it makes a big difference who you run with or who's running with you. Running with Lynn wasn't a competition. Running with Lynn didn't make us bottle proof. They threw the bottle at him too. But running with Lynn meant that we were in this together, and we were together not because I could keep up with him, but because he didn't leave me. There's an imagery in Christianity, and it shows Christians as runners. Paul talks about running with the games, and James talks about running with perseverance, or talks about perseverance. He doesn't talk about running, but it talks about perseverance. The Hebrew writer talks about running with perseverance. And usually when we talk about running, we focus on the discipline. We talk about the reward. We talk about the finish. But in all the 27 years after having run with Lynn, or having Lynn run with me, I think about it in the terms of these promises in Scripture. Jesus is quoted as saying, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And then the Hebrew writer says, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Or if you'd like to paraphrase that, if Jesus is running by my side, I don't care what they throw at me.